see everyone here again at Quakecon. And there's an answer session where you can get as detailed as you want to with any of the technical questions or other business directions here. But the big thing is, we have lots of different projects going on now, but the big gun really is Rage. It's the project we've been working on for a long time now after a project reboot. And we showed some new footage at E3 a little while ago, but we have a bunch of new stuff we're going to show here. So this is first look at some brand new stuff out of Rage. Where there's certain fixed overheads that we have, and there's a cushion that you have to leave to kind of aim for 60 frames per second. So even though they're going to be built on fairly similar technologies, you can expect the Doom beam to look like it's built with the next generation graphics engine, because it's going to be able to apply 3 times as much horsepower to everything. So we have, it's certainly interesting as we look back how the company's been evolving, where a few years ago we had one project at a time, and that was really all we worked on. We would get up and we'd say, okay, here's how Quake 3 is doing, or here's how Doom 3 is doing. And we always tried to work with partner companies like Raven, other studios with Activision and so on, that we could do to expand what we could do as a company, because we tried to stay small. For a long time, we grew at a rate of 2 or 3 employees a year until we got up to maybe 40 or so people. And that was a really important strategic decision for us. Where early on, in the early days, around the original Doom, there was all this madness of every developer wanted to be a publisher, and there were lots of developers that went out, looked like they were going to hit it big, and cratered in various ways. And it had always been really my push to say that, well, we want to stay a small company, we want to do one really good project, we don't want to overreach ourselves. But over time, 15 years later, the situation has changed a little bit, and with 4-year development cycles, that's a big play to be making over and over. And while we made the play with Doom 3 and it was a success, we're making the play again with Rage. We don't want to keep staying in this model, so we did decide that we wanted to diversify the company some. And we've got 3 sort of general directions that we're going now. We have the big guns, the AAA cross-platform titles with Rage and what Doom is going to be. And that's still where the bulk of our effort goes. Most of our people are there. Most of the additional people that we're hiring are going to be on those types of projects. But the other things are also really interesting and exciting, and they let us have some of the excitement of the short game development cycles, the rapid turnarounds, and the sense of innovation that you would get where you were working on games in a year or 6 months or something like that. Now, the mobile development was my first bet a couple of years ago. And it was, I've talked about that now a couple of Quakecons, and it was really kind of a It seemed like a good idea, it seemed like it might work out, it was interesting, so we decided to go ahead and go for it. And it has been a success. We sold over 2 million units on there. Each game has gotten better than the one before it. We've had this excellent evolutionary cycle where those of you that have looked at the games originally as they progressed from Doom RPG through Orcs and Elves 2, each one definitely got better than the other. It wasn't just taking it and reskinning it, adding some new levels, cranking them out with the same level editor. It was like the old days when we went from Catacombs 3D to Wolfenstein to Doom, where each thing was able to really make significant progress. With the latest game, with Wolfenstein RPG, we made the decision to go ahead and put a brand new 3D renderer inside it, where the early games so far have been based on what used to be called sort of 2.5D technology, sort of Doom level technology, where you had walls and floors, different types of things, limitations in the geometry, tile-based kind of map creation on there. And we did a lot with that, and in fact, it's always the most rewarding thing for me as a programmer, as an engine programmer, to see when the designers take sort of the engine that you've provided, and they do everything that you expect them to do with it, and then they do more things that you really didn't think about. And it was clear that the mobile technologies were really bursting at the seams, where they pulled a lot of tricks out that we hadn't really thought about. They were doing lots of interesting things, but we were just bumping right up against the limits of both the technology that it was based on, and very significantly the limits in the mobile space on what we had in terms of content distribution. The games that we've shipped, I think over 1 million, well over 1 million units of the games that we've sold here have been 300K for the entire game. And of course we lose 300K behind the couch on modern console games. We just don't know where it goes. We add everything up and it's like, oh, there's a couple megs missing. Oh well. It's very different on the really tight embedded platforms on there. And you're down doing crazy things like compressing your text strings and doing all sorts of, we actually had to care about code space on there. We're like, okay, this feature takes an extra 500 bytes of code, and maybe we can't have it. And while that has its own curious sort of fun optimization task element to it, it definitely becomes the limiting factor on what you wind up doing to advance the gameplay in it. So we did make the decision on this generation to increase our low-end spec, where previously we've been making games that were a high-end one at 1.5 or 2.5 megs and the low-end at 300K, and that really determined what was going to be in the games. Now we bumped it up to say, we considered possibly just going with the high-end one, which would have been great from a game design standpoint, but the raw numbers just don't really quite support it. So we have bumped up to 600K at the minimum and 2.5 megs on the high end. And I must say that that's probably the one disappointment that I really got with the mobile space, where when we started this 2 years ago, the big talk was that everybody buys the cell phone turnover rate is every 6 months, that people buy new cell phones all the time. We expected the market to move in terms of minimum hardware requirements a lot more than it actually did. And while we've seen incredible advances on the high end, up to the extremely powerful high-end phones that we've got, the low-end market, where a lot of the sales have still been dominated by these very low-end SKUs. And I remember when I started this, I actually looked at